And then here we have the visual of the final output, which we could take a look at in HTML. So as mentioned, this one didn't have a code chunk option, so we could see the code and the output. This one said echo is false, so we only see the output. The headings have been rendered like so. Bolded text has been bolded, things like that. Okay. Any questions so far?
Yes, we have a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
Yes. So, hi, other than rendering a PDF or documents, can one publish a report like in Shiny? Markdown is heavily used in Jupyter notebooks. Are there plans to integrate Quarto in Python Jupyter notebooks?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of questions there. And please let me know if you have like any further questions or if I'm not answering it. So can one publish a report like in Shiny? So Quarto actually has an extension called Shiny Live that lets you embed Shiny documents within Quarto. And so if you're looking to do that, to actually use Quarto to publish your Shiny app, that is one option for you. If you mean like kind of interactive ones, like that's also what you would do. There's ways of embedding actual Shiny things in there. Recently, in the latest release of Quarto, there are also Quarto dashboards, which let you create dashboards. But if you're familiar with Flex Dashboard, there are certainly limitations in terms of that interactivity before you have to like switch to something like Shiny instead of just Quarto itself. And Markdown is heavily used in Jupyter notebooks. Are there plans to integrate Quarto and Python? Yes, so Quarto can render Python Jupyter notebooks, just like it can render our Markdown documents. Because Quarto uses different engines in the backend, if it's using the Jupyter engine, it actually can render Python Jupyter notebooks just like anything else. And so, yeah, that's definitely an option for you. Yeah. And if you have additional questions, we have time after the session as well.
Okay, the next one by Kelvin, I'm assuming we can handle this at the end.
Okay.
He would wish to share an example with you, just to get your comment. So Alberto's question is when to use a Quarto project.
Yeah. So I have to admit, I did skip over this. The document that, I'm sorry, the project that I shared in the GitHub repo and the Posit Cloud account are already Quarto projects. And I recommend using Quarto projects almost anytime you have like a bundle of documents together. And it makes it easier to render and publish the documents and keep everything organized. So I almost always start off everything with a Quarto project before I start building my slides or my documents or things like that.
Okay, thank you for that. And the last question is, does Quarto have a book down features? The book down
Yeah.
feature.
So as mentioned, so our Markdown, one of the difference between our Markdown and Quarto is our Markdown had this ecosystem of our Markdown packages to create different formats. So there was book down for books. Quarto is Quarto for everything, and the sorts of things you can create include books. And so you don't have to install something separate if you want to create a Quarto book. You in your Quarto kind of configuration files, you would just specify that you want books and then organize things accordingly to that. And I could probably show a quick example. So this is the Quarto website. If you go to the gallery, they have some examples. So for example, the latest version of R for Data Science was built using Quarto, and it is a book. And so on the left-hand side, there's different navigation for each chapter. There's table of contents for each section within the chapter as well. And Yeah, that is one option for you. The Quarto is an option for you if you're looking to write a book. I don't believe there is like a single function or anything like that that would convert an existing book down to a Quarto book. You probably have to create a Quarto book and move your files over and everything like that. But again, Quarto can render R Markdown documents as is. So you wouldn't have to change anything within your R Markdown document in order to render it in a Quarto book. One thing to note, though, is if your Quarto book has specific YAML headings and things like that, those you may want to check and make sure that your Quarto book can actually use them when rendering the book. Because if the YAML headings are different, that's just like one part of the document that you may have to change.
Okay. Should I ask you one last question?
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good.
We have, how can we render to a specific journal requirements? Would it be possible to show us this?
Yeah, so I'm going to touch briefly on Quarto extensions at the end, but what extensions are tools to modify and extend Quarto in different ways. And so again, we'll talk about it briefly, but I won't talk about a specific journal or anything like that. This repository is called the Awesome Quarto repository, and it has a lot of resources for folks. And if you go down and see templates, journals, you can click here. And here's a list of available extensions for different journals in Quarto. So when you click on one of them, it'll let you know how to install it and everything like that. These are pre-built and you can use them. So if you are, I don't know, submitting to the Institution of Physics journal, for example, you could use this extension to create journal articles in the format that they want. But I won't be talking about how to create extensions in this talk. And but hopefully, you know, some of these can either serve as like the journal journal format that you need, or show kind of how you would create it so that you would create a Quarto extension for yourself for the specific journal that you're submitting to.
All right, no other question. You may proceed.
Yeah. Okay, now let's create our first Quarto report. So we're going to start off by editing that YAML header, the top with all of our metadata, that such as author and subtitle, things like that. So here we're editing the title, the author, and the date. If you're following along, feel free to change the author to your name or anything like that. For date, if you notice, you could write a date in the format year dash month dash day. Or if you want the date to be automatically updated every single time you re-render the report, you could write today. Next, we're going to modify the HTML a little bit. So this is a configuration for the HTML format called embed resources. And this part is very important for us for some of the things that we're going to do later on. In general, what this means is you create self-contained documents. And so that means when you create your HTML file, it doesn't have any external dependencies. And so this kind of self-contained means that if somebody else were to open that HTML file, they would see it the way that you want it to see. Without this, I don't know if you've ever received an HTML file and it has no formatting, it has no images, it's definitely not the way that you want it to look. That is because it's not self-contained. And so embedding the resources are useful for sharing, but in today's case, it's for some of the more advanced things that we're going to do in a little bit. And then we're going to add global chunk options. So previously we saw we could add individual code chunk options with the pound sign and then the dash and then, you know, echo false or things like that. But we can also assign those code chunk options to every single code chunk in the document by putting it in the YAML under execute. So in this case, we have echo false because I'm going to assume my stakeholders for this report are not interested in the data or the code. They don't want to see how I wrangled the code to create what they want to see. So I'm going to mark echo as false so they don't see the code. They don't have to worry about it. Message and warning are also false. These are to suppress the text that sometimes comes out of like loading. dplyr, for example, populates a bunch of text, which again, I'm going to assume my stakeholders don't want to see. Next, we're going to add a setup chunk. So we're going to add a code chunk with the 3 backticks and then R. We're going to add an individual chunk option with a label. So I'm going to call this code chunk setup. And so that makes it easier to find and reference later on. And this setup chunk has all the packages that we're going to be using for the report. And then also pulling in the data that we're going to be using for the report. Now that I have everything set up, at this point, I would recommend starting to create a rough draft of what it is that you want to create. So, you know, what text are you going to put and where? How do you want to format that text? Do you want to create things like columns so that things are easier to read and split up? Adding headings so that it's easier to navigate a document. What figures are you going to use? What tables are you going to use? Do you need any captions or cross-references? And just setting up like kind of the skeleton of what it is that you're going to create so that you can work on automating it or adding more data later on. One example of something that you can add is a figure with captions and labels. So in this case, if you add a label and the label name starts with fig dash, this creates a label that can be used later on for cross-referencing. So that means if you have a figure at the top of your page, for example, and then later on in your report, you want to refer back to that figure, then you create this cross-reference label, in this case, fig state map. And then you can use that label at any point in your document to cross-reference back to that first figure. You could add things like fig captions. And so this like creates a little bit of text underneath your outputted figure in order to provide some details as to what it means, things like that. And to actually reference the figure in other locations, you would use the notation that's down below with the @ and then the name of that figure. Something else that I wanted to note is inline code. So what oftentimes when we are writing reports that are based on data and things like that, there's oftentimes things that we want to reference from within that data in our report. So for example, total number of counties in Alabama is 65. So I could type out 65. Number of polling places, 2,075, and I could type that out. As you can imagine, this can be a really big error-prone issue. It is very easy to make mistakes as you're typing. It's very easy to forget what you've updated and what you haven't updated. And it's very easy, like every time that your data changes, you'll have to go back and change the results every single time. And so this can be quite tedious and time-consuming. And so to avoid doing that, you can use something called inline code within our Markdown. So within your text itself, where you do a backtick R, and then the expression of code that you want to execute inside of those backticks. And every time you render, that code will be executed and your output will show up as opposed to you having to hard code those values yourself. So for example, instead of writing these 3 bullet points manually, I can use inline code. And I apologize, I could not figure this out, but my presentation would not render this correctly. So please ignore these 2 curly braces. It should just be a backtick R and then the expression. But I could not get it to work. So my apologies. But here, instead of hard coding 65, I have the code that calculates how many counties, or yes, how many counties are in Alabama from my code or from my data polling places. So it takes polling places, filters to Alabama, counts the number of distinct county names, and then counts them. And every time I render the document, that number will be updated. So say for some reason, I'm rerunning this report next year with new data, I can just switch out the data and rerun the report without having to change all of those values individually. Another thing you can add are what are called footnotes. So those are the square braces, a caret, and then the name of that footnote. And then to actually write out the footnote, later on you would use that, that notation again, and then the text that you want associated with that footnote. So for example, here we have all this text, and at the very end, I'm saying, hey, I would like to add a footnote here. And then the footnote itself is going to say data from Tidy Tuesday. And even if they're placed close together, when you actually render the report, the footnote will be at the end, will be an actual footnote. So let's see what that looks like. Back in RStudio, here, if you open up the rough draft, 01 rough draft document, let's just talk through these differences again. So first up is the YAML, which has been updated with a new title, an author, and date. Embed resources is true, and the various different code options, code chunk options. Here, I've started writing out the text that I'm interested in. The footnote that I want to add is here, and the footnote text is down below, which will render in the right place when I click render. Here's my setup chunk with all my packages and the data. And so in terms of how I want it to look like, so I start building some headers. So here's the state name, I'm sorry, headings, and then here's another heading that says overview. And here's what I mentioned earlier in that instead of writing out the number of counties for Alabama, I include my code within this expression so that it is rendered every single time I rerun the report. Quarto has a lot of different functionality for customizing your document in terms of how you want it to look. So one example here, layout and call equals 2, is an option to create 2 columns in your report. You could create 3 columns or 4 columns or things like that. You can lay out images in different ways. You can, in HTML documents, for example, make things wider than the margin, like the set margins and things like that. So there are so many different things that you can do to really make your report your own. I recommend going to the Quarto website and just really reading through. That's how I became familiar with the different options in order to know, you know, oh, can I do this with Quarto? How do I make this do that? And so in this case, this is creating a layout with 2 columns. Here I have another code chunk with the image that I want to create. So with a label that I'm going to use as a cross-reference later, a caption, pulling locations in the state under figcap, and then a ggplot that creates a map of the polling places in the particular state. This is important for the PDF version later on. It doesn't really matter for the HTML version, but it creates a page break. And then again, I'm just kind of building out the skeleton of my document. So if you can imagine, it'll have a head title, it will have a brief overview of the state, and then I want to create a section that's polling places by every single county in that state. So here's like the first county, and I have a little bit of information, the total number of county polling places, which again is calculated using code, not hard-coded in. And then here I'm creating a table that talks about, or that selects the 6 examples of polling places in that county, just to give a brief overview. And then I do it for the next county, which is Baldwin. And same thing, I have the polling places, the total number of polling places, example locations. But I'm going to stop there. And the reason is there are 65 counties in Alabama, and I do not want to do this for every single county. As I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to make mistakes. And also, it would take a lot of time. So we'll talk about in a second how to make it so that you don't have to do that for every single county in this data set. one final thing is up here. I added my cross-reference. So with the @ fig state map, this is going to reference back to that state map that I created up above. And clicking render. All right, so here is my example report. So here's my new title, author, and date. The text that I provided. In terms of the footnote, it's this one here. If I hover over it, I can see what it says, or if I click it, I see it down below. This arrow brings me back to where I was. Here is the 2-column layout that I mentioned. One side with the overview, and all of these numbers are coded. They're not manually written in by me. This is pulling directly from the data set. And then on the right here is that map that I created using ggplot2. Here is the both the label, so I know it's called figure 1, and then the the caption, polling locations in the state right underneath. And here is a cross-reference. If I hover over it, I can see what I'm referring to. If I click, it brings me back up to that image. And then here is an example of, the sort of things that I want to create for each county. For the county, I want to calculate the total number of polling places and the example locations down below. For Baldwin as well, but how do I do that for all 65 counties? We'll talk about in a second. Okay, any questions so far?
Yes, we have one question by Shell.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there exists a Quarto book that has an embedded Shiny app built using Shiny Live?
Oh, that is a great question. I do not know of any off the top of my head. It's not a book. Oops. But I believe that the Shiny website is built. Oh, sorry, maybe the Python one. I believe this is built with Quarto and has examples of Shiny Live in the documents. 1 second. Yeah, so I believe this is Quarto, and this is kind of what it would look like, where you have the text and things like that. And so in here, this is the Shiny app embedded with Shiny Live that you can, interact with directly in the document itself. I don't think it's a book, but I think the functionality would be the same.
Okay.
But I'll look into it and see if I can find a Quarto book specifically. I think the Shiny Live for R is fairly new. My cat says hello. It was announced during PositConf 2023. So it might be more likely that there's more examples with Python.
Okay. All right. We have got a few questions coming up. We have, is it possible to render with 2 dates? So for example, when I first created the Quarto document and when I render it.
Yes, I believe. So here is an example of the YAML intelligence that I mentioned earlier. And I thought, oh yes. So that is one way that you could do it. So you could put date and say like when I'll put the 1st of January and date modified today. And so by editing that and clicking render, we should see 2 separate options. Metadata, yep, up here to really clarify, originally published and then when it was modified.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And one other question is it difficult to change the global font style?
It is not difficult. We will get to that in a sec, how to change the style of your report.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Great questions. Thanks, everyone. Cool. Okay. So just a brief recap. We started our Quarto document. We started creating our report, started sketching out like titles, dates, what images we want, what text we want, what tables we want, and everything like that. But as mentioned, we have 39 states in this document or in this data set. We have a lot of counties for each of those states. Like, wow, that would be a lot of work if we wanted to do that manually. So 1,881 counties and 39 states, and I don't know, that's a lot of edits is what I mean. So because we are using R, we would be able to see how we can automate the process of creating these reports for all the counties and for all the states. So as mentioned before, Quarto uses the knitr engine in order to execute R code. knitr is a package that actually has a ton of different functions that are so useful for creating documents. And one of those functions is called knitchild. And knitchild lets you break up your documents into smaller pieces. So instead of having one super, super long R Markdown document, you can split them up and then knit them all together using knitchild. And another functionality of knitchild is having a child document that kind of serves as a template. And then you create a function in the main document that runs the child document repeatedly with different parameters. And then the main document knits everything together into a single document from that child document. So what exactly do I mean? So in the main document, we're going to have a code chunk where first we're going to specify the counties in Alabama that we want to create each of those section fours. If you recall, it was with a heading, with the total number of polling places, and a table with the first 6 polling places in each of those counties. So we're going to create a vector called counties that's going to give me the name of all of those polling places. I'm sorry, of all those counties. Then I create this lapply, this loop called expanded child. And this is the one that's going to take that child document and apply each of those counties to that template child document to create all those sections for every single one of the counties. And then parse child is going to unlist or make it all into a character vector that is then going to be rendered in the main document all together. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully we'll see it in action a little bit so you can see what I mean. So that was the main document. In the child document, create another file called template or whatever you would like to call it. And so this is the template that you want to feed all of those counties in. And so in this case, current title refers to that particular, the county that we are looping through. And it's going to create the headings. It's going to create the total number of polling places, and then the table for that county. And it's going to keep doing that for every single county that we have in our list. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So here, if you notice, instead of writing out or hard coding the name of the county, I'm using current title in these curly braces. So in terms of what that looks like, if we go back to RStudio and click to iterate report with knitchild.qmd, down below, instead of like that section where I put Baldwin, total number of polling places, things like that, here I'm going to create my code chunk, which is going to iterate through all of the counties in the child document and then knit them all together in this main document. And then if I open up the template document, this is what it looks like. So for each county, it's going to run this code with the polling places and counting them up and then creating the table. And so when you do that, open it up, it's gonna look very similar to the top, but when we go down to the polling places by county, we have the sections for every single county in the state. So all 65 with the polling places and example locations. So rather than having to do that manually, we created a child document and looped through that. Okay. Any questions? When I first learned of Nichad, it was amazing. I could not believe it.
Yes, we do have a question.
Okay.
Can you show us Quarto PDF?
Oh yes.
Um,
I'm sorry. We will
can you
get
show
to
us?
that.
All right. Yeah, all right. So the other part was that, is there anything extra we need to download to open the Quarto PDF file? Just it's a combination of that question. And the other question is, how easy is it to customize Quarto to resonate with corporate PowerPoint slides? Like in Office R, you can integrate corporate slide templates with data analysis done in R. So this shortens the effort of creating slides.
Yeah. So to the question, is there anything extra we need to download to open the Quarto PDF file? If you don't mind waiting till the end, and we can try it in the Posit Cloud account. I have to be honest, I don't remember. I have had Quarto for so long and updated or installed all the things I need for Quarto PDF. I actually don't remember what is needed. But since the Posit Cloud project is like fresh, we can see if we run into anything there or if it just runs. If you have access to the Posit Cloud account, feel free to try and let me know. Sorry, I don't have that answer right off the bat. And in terms of the question of corporate PowerPoint slides, so the slides that I'm showing you right now are built in Quarto, but they are not PowerPoint. They use a tool used Reveal.js to create them. And so that is integrated with Quarto and really easy to do, but I don't know about PowerPoint, like PPT slides. Let me write it down. And maybe we could do a little bit of research in the Q&A section. Sorry about that. These are good questions and I don't know the answers.
Yeah. And then one last question. Given you have experience with the both Markdown and Quarto, where do you see the future between the two?
Yeah, so I would say like our Markdown again is not going away. It's still being maintained and everything like that. But our Markdown is not going to, at least from a Posit side, it's not going to get any like huge changes or huge feature updates or anything like that. Of course, there's still, in addition to the main maintainer, there's also the community that's maintaining the packages and things like that. So so I would say, again, like if you are already using R Markdown and it serves you well, like that's great. But if you are interested in like the newest, the latest, and additional functionality as more things come out, like Shiny Live, which we've talked about, Shiny Live is now out and now Quarto supports it. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things released. And if we, and if you're interested in the latest and greatest, then it might be worth switching.
All right. Those are the questions we have at the moment.
Cool. Okay. So we have created a section in our document that iterates through the data to create those different sections for each county. But what if we want to create a report for every single state in our data set? And so this is where parameters come into play. So parameterized documents, excuse me. So that parameters refer to variables or values that you set in the YAML header. And then you specify those values throughout your document. And every time you want to run the same report with different values, you just have to change the parameter in the YAML. And here is an image from Parameterized Reporting the Quarto by J.D. Ryan. So one Quarto document, but for different values, you create different outputs. So in this example is year. In our example, it's going to be state. So to add parameters, you add params to your YAML, and then you give your parameter a name. You want to give it something that's like useful for you to remember what it means, and in this case, state, and then you assign a value to that parameter. In this case, Alabama, for example, the first state. And so now our YAML looks like this. Now throughout your document, you want to change anytime you've hard-coded the state name into the parameter, and the notation is params $state. So every time you see Alabama in the document, you change it to params $state. That includes in the title, right? In your code. So here, instead of name equals Alabama, it's name equals param state. And also any of your inline code that mention Alabama. And also you can't forget the template document, the child document that we created, that you have to change to your parameters in that as well. And so every single time you want to rerun the report with a different parameter, right? Here we have Alabama state. Then you can change it to say California, because you want to see California. You would change it in your YAML header and then re-render. And so you have a few options for rendering the document. You can click the render button, as we have been doing. Quarto also allows you to use the command line interface or the terminal, and you could type this out in your terminal, and you specify Quarto render, the name of your report, and then your parameter, which is state, is California now. Quarto also has an R package, and you could use the Quarto render function there. And it's a little bit more familiar to our users. You use Quarto render. You give an input, which is the report that you want to render, and then that parameter that you want to render in that use when rendering that report. Okay, so in terms of what that looks like, if you open up O3 iterate reports parameters, up here in our YAML, now we have a param setting, and here we're going to put state is Alabama. Up here in the title, we are saying our param state instead of the name of the state. And then throughout our code, here's the inline code where filter state equals param state now. So everywhere that it mentioned Alabama, now it says param state. So we can render that, and as you could probably expect, it's going to render it for Alabama. Okay, great. Now I want to do it for California. It's going to change the params to state California. Click render. All right, and now it's updated with California. So here we have the title, now it says California. We have a map of California. The polling place is 3,832 instead of 1,881 for Alabama. And here for our counties, now these are the Californian counties as opposed to the Alabama counties. So that is parameters. Oh, I'm sorry. Any questions?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
We have a question on the parameters. If I'm creating a report for millions of customers, how do I look through the parameters?
If your question is how do you create a report for each of your customers, we're about to get to that. Yep.
Okay. And lastly, how do I look through parameters without changing them manually, like you're doing on Alabama and California?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're about to talk about that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, the data set has 39 reports. You have various options as to what to do. But one option is you can change the parameters for each state and render the document. Oh, I'm sorry, this should say render the document, change the file name to match the parameter, and then repeat 39 times. So this is JD Ryan's joke. Thank you, JD. I thought it was so funny. Like I was like, there is probably not a world where you want to repeat that 39 times. And again, it runs into the same issue where it's very time consuming, tedious, error prone to do that every single time you want to rerun the report with different parameters. So instead, you can render all 39 reports using another functionality because we are using R. So you can create a data frame with columns that match, then use Quarto render. Oh, I'm sorry. Create a data frame with columns that match the parameters in Quarto render. So that's output format, which is the file type that you want, the output file, the file name that you want, and the execute params, the list of parameters that you want to run through your report. Then you use per, which is a package that helps you apply functions to lists of variables, map over each row using per, and then create a parameterized report for every single one of the states that you want that way instead of doing it manually. So first we're going to create the data frame to iterate over. So here are the packages that we need, the data that we're using. So first off, we're going to create a unique list of all of the states in the data set of using distinct from dplyr. For the example here, I'm just going to choose the first 5 because doing 39 states will take a long time. Then I create that, the data frame with that has columns that matches the parameters in Quarto render. And so that's what this chunk is doing. And then this, the final part is just pulling the things that we need for Quarto render instead of having a ton of columns that we don't need. And then we use map. We give it the list, the unique list of state names. We give it the function that we want. In this case, it's Quarto render. And the input. So here we give it the file that we want to iterate over, the report, I mean. And then we run that. So in terms of what that looks like, here is the iterate report. Yes. Okay. So here again, we have the params and everything like that, but we want to iterate and create a report for all 39, well, for 5 states using this. Here is my R code that we just saw that uses a Quarto render function. Here is the states, up to here. Here are the states that I want to create reports for. Here are the parameters for the function. And here is my per loop that's going to go through and re-render that report for every single parameter that I specify without me having to do it, like change it in the document individually. Oh, the question as to how to change the file name. So in the parameters that you give Quarto render, you can specify output file. And with paste 0, you can say, hey, I want the name of the file to be the state name -polling -places.html. So running this might take a little bit. So essentially what it is doing, it is running Quarto render with each of the parameters that I specified in the data frame to create a report with each of those parameters and give it the file name that specifies which state I am rendering that report for.
Isabella, we have one question. How do we change the name of the output file based on the parameter?
Yeah, so this is how you would do it. In this function, you can specify in the data frame that you're feeding Quarto render output file. And you can say, like, instead of hard coding the state name, you can say to lower state, and then, whatever file name really that you want using R. And here's an example of what that looks like. So for those 5, so it's finished. I have Alabama polling places HTML. If I click that, I have my report for Alabama. If I go to let's do Arkansas, now I have it for Arkansas, and everything has been updated. Arkansas, the map of Arkansas, I don't know why it looks like that. Here are all the counties in Arkansas. California, open that. So I was able, with Quarto render and per together, to create these reports for all of the parameters that I wanted without having to type them in manually. And then by specifying the output file name in Quarto render, I was able to change the name again automatically instead of hard coding it in. And so I had filtered this to 5, but I could, in theory, do this for every single state in my data set. And again, JD is giving a workshop on February 21st, and she really goes into depth as to how to create this parameters and what the functions are doing and all these different functionalities. So I really recommend joining her if you're interested in a deeper look into what we just did. Any other questions?
No question.
Okay.
At the moment, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get into styling your reports. I know there are a few questions on this. So Quarto has 25 built-in themes from the Bootswatch project. And to add them to your document, you can add theme united under your HTML in the YAML and specify the theme that you are interested in. So for example, if you're interested in the theme called United, you can go here and open up 04 United theme. And if you notice here, I have theme is United, click render. And now my document has this United theme that's built into Bootswatch. Okay. We talked about extensions earlier. So extensions are a way to modify and extend Quarto. The awesome Quarto GitHub repo, which is linked in the README, has a lot of available extensions, not just for reports, also for presentations, for journal articles, and things like that. If you want to create or add an extension, it also modifies how your document looks like. So I have installed this extension called Sketchy Quarto. And usually in the README, they have instructions as to how to actually use it in your document. For Sketchy Quarto, I have to change the format from HTML to Sketchy HTML. So if you open up 05 Sketchy theme, here is my Sketchy HTML and rendering that. Now it's applied that sketchy theme look. So again, there are a ton of built-in extensions, and if you are looking for, a specific look, I recommend looking through the available extensions to see if what you need already exists. And finally, we had talked about custom themes, and these are to make it look exactly how you want it to look. And to do that, you can add CSS or SCSS. files to your project. You include it similar to how you did the United theme earlier and specify, I have a custom.css file. And for this next example, I actually took my style from this presentation and just dropped it into the report GitHub repo. I didn't have to change anything. That's another nice thing about Quarto. Your style sheet from your presentation will work on your report, will work on your book. You don't have to change anything because of the kind of unified syntax for everything in Quarto. The Quarto website does have examples of all of the things that you can do. SCSS has this kind of user-friendly way of denoting things that you want to specify. So here I have an import URL from Google Fonts because I have specific Google fonts that I want to use. And then font family sans serif is saying for all of the font that's sans serif in my report, use this Francis font. And that's all I have to do in order to change the font throughout. And I can specify things like the heading color. If I want my heading to be a different font from the rest of my font, I could do that. Font size, link color, there's a ton of options. And once you have written your style sheet, you embed it using theme in your YAML header. And finally, I'm also going to add a title block. So this is an image at the top of your report, just to give it a little bit more style. So if you open up 06 custom theme and click render, here we have the final look. So the font has all been changed according to that Google font that I've added. I have a title banner, an image at the top. Alaska is not a great example, but let's do California. And really, you can make it look exactly how you want it to look. Ta-da. Okay, just one final thing is we've talked about rendering other formats. You can do that by changing the format where we had format HTML before. Now we have format PDF. And you can also add multiple formats. For example, this one has a format HTML and PDF if you want to be able to provide both to your audience. And so if you open up 07 multiple formats, click render. Sorry that it takes a bit to render. And open this up, I have my HTML document here, which I could share, but say somebody wants to print it, they could click PDF. Hopefully it opens. Well, that's opening. Once you click that, it should open up the PDF format of the same report. Okay, there we go. Oof, is it so slow? There we go. So this is what it looks like. So as you can see, the style is not going to apply to your PDF. Your style is going to apply to your HTML. If you want to style your PDF, I think that is a topic of another talk for sure. Styling PDFs is a very interesting but complex task, and I have some resources in the GitHub repo if you want to learn more. Nicola Rennie wrote a really great blog post if you're interested in doing it using LaTeX. All right, that is it. I realize that we're running up on time, but thank you so much. Please keep in touch. I would love to see what you create, and yeah, and please reach out if you have any questions, and I know I have a few things to follow up on as well.
All right, we have a question. Can one integrate Quarto with MikeText to to borrow on the rich libraries for formatting documents, especially PDFs.
Yeah. So I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with PDFs. I know that you can do LaTeX, and there's also in the latest version of Quarto, you can use Typist to edit PDFs, but I don't know about MikTeX specifically.
Okay, thank you so much. So just in the next few minutes, let me share my slides again just to end the session. All right. So first of all, Isabella, thank you so much. This was a very productive chat. I like how our participants were engaging and asking questions. I haven't used Quarto, so I am so thank you also. I should not be getting into using Quarto now. I'm well convinced. All right. So just to end up, we are looking for our ladies co-organizers. If you are you identify yourself as a woman or belonging to the minority genders, please feel free to fill out this form and join our team, and we'll be happy to have you. All right. Once again, thank you to all participants and Isabella for joining us. Feel free to reach out to us via this email address, the LinkedIn and Twitter usernames, yes, and as well as our main Our Ladies Meetup page. I think with that we can stop the session, but there are a couple of questions that we need to that I would ask you, Isabella, to answer. So one was on Kevin. Would it be possible? Was it? Sorry, let me get. They want to share.
Well, yeah. The native archetype information or question.
Yes.
I forget who, but if you could reach out to me, I'm more than happy to dig in to the native archetype questions. And also in the GitHub repo, I have the blog post, and then also Hadley Rooken wrote a blog post kind of explaining, why the Tidyverse team switched to the native R pipe. I find like with Migrid R pipes and native R pipes, it's pretty easy to switch between the two. The really big differences are when you're using base R. And I think that's where a lot of the functionality comes in, but that's just been my experience.
All right. The email address has been shared by chat. Please reach out to her. And again, Isabella, thank you. I think we'll be ending the session. Please do expect the recording should be shared within the course of the week, and the slides shared her details. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her. I'm sure Isabella will be happy to answer all the questions that you have.
Thank you so much to you, Lucy. I so appreciate it.
All right, and with that, we can end the session. Yeah.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Bye.